that via social media. The hashtag is KTN Morning Express. If you'd like to tweet, the Twitter handles are going to be displayed as we go along. I'll start by quickly reintroducing the panel that we have this morning. We are joined by Koki Ocheng, who's a lecturer, media and communication at USIU, Luke Mulunda, who's a media analyst, and Victor Bwire, who's a programs manager at Media Council of Kenya. Today, we'd like to just highlight some of the trends and things that are happening when it comes to matters journalism. And just before we went on air, we were already beginning our discussion off air by trying to identify whether there is anything like a citizen journalism, the term citizen journalism, because that's what we had as a headline here. But let me start with you, Victor. You have mentioned and said even off air, and maybe you can do that now, in terms of there being no term as citizen journalism.
Yes, Mike, when, for example, at the council, when we are giving out the accreditation, we give to journalists, whether now you work for print, for broadcast, we don't accredit the channel you work for. We accredit you as a journalist, then wherever. Yeah, and people have struggled. I remember even in one of the court cases we had when Media Council and Editors Guild went to court about the Kenya Information Amendment Act, CA and Media Council, or that issue. The struggle to create a category called broadcast journalist, print journalist, and there's nothing like that. A journalist is a journalist. Yeah, a journalist is a journalist.
And maybe at this point it might be good to define, and Koki, you could do that for us, what exactly is a journalist? Because there are those who produce content and would like to be called journalists, yet there should be a very clear difference between a journalist and just a content producer.
Whenever you talk about professionalism, you always look at, is there a theoretical underpinning? And in journalism as a profession, the profession in itself is guided by the gatekeeping theory, where you're talking about factification, verification, and then distribution of information. So there is a process, and there are people who are in charge of how information is churned out. I know Luke will tell you more about that. Secondly, a journalist is seen to be someone who's working paid within a media house, and basically somebody who's covered by what we call the reporter's privilege. The reporter's privilege basically protects you in terms of sources, in terms of how you get your story, in terms of if you want to keep your sources away from the public, it protects you from that. And then of course there is the code of ethics, what guides the journalist. I mean, there is a way you operate. There are systems in which you produce content. For example, if you're going to write a story, you have to look at the inverted pyramid. There are ways of doing things that are journalistic. Okay,
which are guided by the journalistic tenets and all that. But what would you do? Look, there's a definition here. The act of citizens having an active role in the process of collecting, reporting, analyzing, and disseminating news. Where does that fall specifically for those who maybe, because in the day and age we are living in, with our phones, with bloggers, with all that, they are actually collecting, reporting, and analyzing information.
Yeah, what you are calling citizen journalism, I think it's a process where now the audience becomes a media. The audience begins to report on issues. And I wouldn't want to call it citizen journalism, as we've said, but possibly call it participatory journalism or public journalism, where I'm a member of the public and I can report something. And as she said, you have to be bound by a certain code of ethics. But now these people, it could be a former journalist now who's no longer employed as or bound by certain rules. It could be an activist, and you've seen most of the citizen journalists, so to speak, most of them are not journalists. They're not trained. They're either activists in the civil society. Some are people who are struggling just to be used. What are they called? They're called mercenaries.
No, they're called keyboard warriors.
Keyboard warriors.
And actually, there's another definition here: when the people formerly known as audience employ press tools to inform one another. What do you call that?
They cannot.
They're informing one another. And they're using press tools.
What we're just calling the use of user-generated content or audience-led programming. It's not journalism.
Actually, if you look at literature around, what they're calling citizen journalists, they call them prosumers. Producers and consumers. So there is no real
look like journalism.
editorial process that goes through there. What normally happens, even if you look at something posted, a discussion will come to an end when there is editorial justice from one individual who will say this topic should change, blah, blah, blah. That's it. So the conversation ends there. It is not a process where, well, I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm writing my story or, taking a photo or, it's not, there's no verification, factification
The question
at all.
is, what makes a journalistic story?
Yeah.
First, you need to get your facts right.
Yeah.
It has to be balanced. You have to check issues of legal issues, defamation and all that. So-called citizen journalists don't do that. For them, the principle is get it written.
Okay, now that we've discounted and said that there is nothing like a citizen journalist, what do we call them? Content producers. Because then we need to get the right term.
User-generated content.
I mean, Mike, and people continue. There's now mobile journalists. You can't. We don't have mobile. We don't have citizen engineers or citizen lawyers, and chiefs and assistant chiefs in the village solve problems. Now, do we call them citizen lawyers?
Lawyers.
No, we can't. So we need to. This is a profession. Journalism is a profession, and the fact that, and in fact, the law recognizes. If you look at the Media Council Act, it talks about journalists and media practitioners, so that they are aware that there are people in the media who work in the media who are not necessarily journalists, but also involved in their aspects of helping, because journalism is teamwork. You alone, as a reporter, you cannot produce all these things. You must have. That's why the law is very clear: journalists and media practitioners. To accept that there are other people, players in the news process that must be recognized.
All right.
Okay, but the blogs, what they call the blog sphere, what is online, comes with another set of people who generate content, the social influencers per se, the bloggers themselves. And the bloggers themselves are sometimes just creative writers who basically critique what is going on in society. And there's nothing wrong with that, but the claim that they are journalists is out of order.
All right, and then how do we protect the profession? Because we may be under the accusation of being Githeri media, so-called, by what others have said, because there's that confusion. You have content producers who are churning out content. We have the media houses and journalists who are doing their work. But somewhere in between there, we get lost. So how do we ensure that we protect that, to separate the two?
You see, Mike, ordinarily, it's just that laws are not followed. For you to operate as a newspaper person in Kenya, there's the Books and Newspaper Act 1974, which requires you to do 1 or 2, 3 things. For you to start a radio or a TV station, whether online or offline, there are rules. The Communication Authority of Kenya, they are there. The Media Council Act gives, in fact, it talks about media and media practitioner online and offline. So the code of ethics applies to journalists whether you are online or offline. And among the people who blog, there are journalists. Luke does an online newspaper and he's a journalist. But there are also those who just do their own things, but they are not. So we are not forcing bloggers to become journalists. But people who are journalists and also use the online space are bound by the code of ethics for the practice of journalism, and they follow it. They have no problem. I see in our database, there are several online radio, TV, we have accredited. The journalist is accredited, but he does an online. But people tend to force to confuse, so that if at all I can write, then I call myself.
You call yourself a journalist.
You are not. We have creative writers.
Not even just writing. Even if you can produce content. Like you have a blog or podcast. There are rules and regulations. There is the system behind the production. For example, if you just look at this media, this room itself as a studio. There are cameras here, there are angles to take. There's a lot of things, intrigues that go to this 30 minutes that we are sitting here. So I think in terms of protection of our profession, I think we have to decide: are we the fourth estate? Are we like a unique group? Do we understand each other as a profession? Does Media Council, for example, take regulation seriously, or do people know what the regulations are? Because if we look at doctors, lawyers, they take their profession well. It's self-regulated. If you violate the rules, the license is taken away. And I think Media Council has done that severally to media personnel. personalities.
All right, and look, coming to you, since you are operating on the online space, do you feel like journalism or the profession is under threat, given that there are those who would want to be on the same space that you are, but not following the code of ethics and not bound by, some of the tenets that you are bound by, yet you're operating on the same platform?
Yeah, there's a big threat. And she mentioned blogosphere. I mean, there's this term called bloggers that now lumps everyone online together, when actually I'm not a blogger. A blogger, the traditional definition of a blogger is someone who was documenting their daily things, what they've done, blogging. That's how the term originated.
Came around.
Yeah, but then anyone online is being called a blogger. And what they're doing, and most of these bloggers are now what we are discussing today as citizen journalists. And now, for them to get some authenticity, they are trying to bring everyone into their group. So that if business today is called a blogger, is called a blog, another online Kawatung, for example, is called a blog, then they feel safe to be in that. So the threat also is when someone reads something online that has been done badly, we all look bad.
Lumped into
that.
that.
We all look bad. So that's why I don't know what
and that's why the question on how we protect that space and ensure that our professionals like you.
I've done a lot of studies that have relied a lot on online print media, and it is more about online violence against women. And when you look at the content, you can clearly tell, these online print media spaces, they do not follow the tenets. They are basically there to, if you look at the content, they thrive on rumors, they thrive on gossip, and therefore, at the end of the day, I mean, it's not like it is really invalidating what journalism does. And let me tell you for a fact, journalism is here to stay. Writing is here to stay. People believe in the media, and who runs the media? It's journalists. So I don't think it's really, it looked like a threat. It's just like also saying advertising has gone to online spaces. It looks like an initial threat, but in real sense, the profession doesn't mutate. And you don't have to compete.
But the question, Koki, would be how many people know what you know that it is not under threat? Because there are those who will confuse citizen journalists for journalists, and as a result, lump everybody into that to a point where it somehow waters down what journalists are doing. Yes, there are those who are still doing their work and making sure that they verify, they go through the code of conduct, everything is done, like you said, it's facts, it's balanced, but you cannot ignore the impact of the citizen journalists.
That's where now you come in to explain, for example, why Robert Alai is in, and why, what are the violations, and what covers him. If you have done a paper on that, basically bloggers are not covered by any of the laws that cover journalists. So that's a good way of exposing the weaknesses of social influencers. And maybe a more description of social influencers would be that they are maybe they are more of activists, they are more of people who are in an activist line of, achievement, more not really like to be passing on information to tell people what to think, agenda setting, isn't it?
Right.
So they are more in a way, building on activism more than they are building on journalism.
Luke, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to say something about content. Content is very expensive. It's hard to, very good content is very difficult to come up with. And what the biggest threat that now we're experiencing, especially online, is where now we have plagiarism coming in, where that content provider doesn't have a newsroom. Someone sits in the house, you post a story online, and within 5 minutes, they picked it. Yeah, like this like mine. I mean, you post like on Business Today, you post a story, and within 10 minutes, like 5 bloggers.
And I can confirm, in the collection of content, you're looking at several print media content about one person. It's the same replicated story. So they just wait for him, and then pick up, and then we say that they are, I don't think there's a threat at all.
Yes, Victor.
Alternative media has existed over the years.
Yes.
And it's not a threat to journalism. Tunnel journalism, yellow journalism, those things existed. And for that, they play complementary roles. People will read those things from wherever, but they will still ask, your story was standard, the credibility and confirmation. So the pressure is more on journalists to give more deep, well-done
Yeah.
stories,
Yes.
so that people now, the issue of credibility is dealt with. So to me, I don't look at this as competition, but something that's giving journalists room to improve their work, so that we are not competing, but we are giving content that content itself separates yours from
now that you're in, you're in a space where you're actually now coming up with new journalists who you're training, are we ensuring that they are well equipped? Because journalism, we must admit that because of technology and because of time, it is changing how we operate. Before, you'd have had to go gather a story, come to the editor has to look at it. Today, that is changing by virtue of the fact that things are happening so fast. Are we preparing them for the current space that we have right now when it comes to journalism, especially given that we now are threatened by some of these so-called citizen journalists?
I mean, you have to prepare them for the speed at which stories will be told. But the processes remain the same. Like he said, they will break the story, they will spread something out, and then people will turn to mainstream media to confirm. That's for a fact. You will need to come to mainstream media to confirm, is this really what is going on? Yes, like we talk about the late Bob Collymore. In the morning, by 6, everybody knew, isn't it? But we still come to media to confirm the story, to get the verified piece, to get, the visuals we've gotten. I mean, so I think the training still remains the same. More emphasis on media ethics and media law, the idea of code of conduct. And I think naturally, we work in an environment where it's very clear. We have the same sense of direction. If you meet journalists, anybody who has undergone that training, the sense of understanding of what journalism is, even for those who are in production, is the same.
And that's why sometimes I laugh. The definition of a journalist is not a problem to the journalists themselves.
Yes.
It's people who are not journalists who try to define who is a journalist. Yes. I mean, we know who a journalist is. We are trained. We know what we are trained. We know what. But people who are non-journalists struggle to want to prove or to define.
And maybe that might be a good thing, because they're trying to have themselves as journalists, meaning they actually agree that journalists do have a very good profession and a good space.
That's the thing.
And they want to attach themselves to that.
So let them go for training.
The training is now what they are doing. Is multimedia training to open up journalists to do for multiple channels. That's something that Academy is now doing, so that you prepare journalists for more.
Okay, and maybe Victor, now that you're at MCK, the question then might be, how do we protect the profession by virtue of the fact that we have all these imposters, let's call them imposters for now, that want to be journalists? How do we ensure that the profession is protected? Because over time it could be watered down just by people who want to make themselves journalists, but they're not.
To me, while people have said the Media Council has not protected journalists, the biggest problem is you editors and HR guys in media houses. You are the people who employ journalists for journalistic roles. Then once you have done that, then we call them imposters, quacks. Because the code says, actually if you read the function of the council, it says, before you employ somebody as a journalist, not as in other roles, but as a journalist, he ought to have been cleared or have been accredited as a journalist.
Exactly.
And for you to be accredited, there are some minimum requirements that you are required. But most of our media house, we employ anybody, everybody, but then they say, Media Council has exposed us, they are not dealing with the quacks.
Yes.
So we need to play a bigger role ourselves. Who are we employing in the first, for which role? And we're not saying we should stop comedians and other, because the Act also says media practitioners. Other people have roles, but for journalistic work, let's employ trained people, and we'll deal with that problem.
Going now back online, the protection we have is ourselves as the media. As you said, is to do quality journalism.
Yes.
Once you do that, you'll stand out. And someone will always come and fact check with you. They'll read something on a blog,
depth,
but they'll
the
come
context.
the depth.
Because while we are complaining, that sales are going down, the other people like the Guardian, the New York,
they are going up.
So we must also realize that it's purely our problem, especially in our Kenyan context, the issue, which approaches are we using.
Would it be safe to say then that the reason why we find many people, possibly our sales going down, is purely because we've lost depth, we've lost context, we've lost the very tenets that made us journalists?
No. The issue is, what business model are you operating on in this era? You know,
Because we are
if you're depending on advertising to be your source of, and we've said this year in, year out until we are tired.
Yeah.
Guardian asks for subscription. New York Times
Precisely.
asks for subscription. If you look at Guardian, I think they have 8 million followers. If every month somebody spends $1, you know, just subscribing you have now
to-
8 million USD.
And then the question would be, what's their secret? What is it that they're doing different?
Their
Because now
secret
they've moved away from traditional waiting for advertisers to come and buy
That's the
the
thing.
content to people literally subscribing, meaning people are willing to pay
Yes,
for
for
what they
good
have.
For quality content.
Yes.
And here we talk about content is the king. Content, but we are not investing in the content.
the
We are not
content.
employing quality journalists. We are not giving
Who
a
is
journalist.
we?
And the media,
the media.
the owners, the investors in the media, including you editors. Because you are
My-
the people who are employing people who are not giving quality content.
My-
Mike, let me add something
Yeah.
on the issue of content. The media in Kenya particularly is taken to be very afraid of the status of the leaders, of politics, of the corporates and all that. And that's why now this alternative media is coming up. Because someone comes with a scandal story, let's say in a corporate, gives it to Standard, the following day Standard doesn't run it. What does that person do?
You look for
No,
weaknesses
not
there.
even that. Just today, you know, Safaricom is a big
Advertiser.
advisor.
Read weekly
advertiser.
Citizen this week.
Yeah, yeah.
So we can't talk much about.
You will see.
But I think key is to, we know journalism in Kenya or in African might have lacked trained, you know, professionals. Then, you know, when the training came in, it was in the 90s, isn't it?
Yeah.
For people who had bachelors. Then now we have a flood of journalists. I mean, we have every university with the training school for journalists. So we don't lack resources.
We have 112
Yes.
colleges.
Exactly.
Journalism in this
So,
country.
so in terms of resources and capacity, it is there. It is
Yes.
granted.
I mean-
Now, the question then would be, and I want us to go back to the business model that we have, because again, we cannot ignore business owners, those who own media houses, because then there's an influence right there, based on the fact that you've said if they're one of your biggest advertisers, or if they own the particular media house that you run, if they have political interest, for example, then that kind of restrains you, because there are certain things that you may not be able to churn out there by virtue of the fact that you're restrained.
No, I think media houses must remember why they exist.
Yeah.
Their business is journalism. And in the business of journalism, when it comes to the newsroom, editorial freedom is key. If you want to really talk to the needs of the audiences, editorial freedom is key. And nobody negotiates that but journalists. You get what I'm saying? The
They
editorial
negotiate it, but they are limited in the sense that, let me put it this way, Koki, if for instance you're going for governor of Nairobi and you own Koki Media House, and you have your editors saying, well, there's some few questions we have about Koki as a governor, if she's running for governorship, they'll not run that story by virtue of the fact that you own the media house. That right there is a bottleneck.
The challenge is, and that is there. Nearly 70% of our media are owned by politics. Yes, that's a fact. But look at it this way. How many of those media houses, where those decisions are made like that because it's the owner, where do they rate? If you looked at the rating of people come to KTN News because of the news, not because of the adverts you carry. So we must also realize the rule of 60-40, that people come to Standard because of the content, the editorial, not the adverts they carry. Not and of late, last 6 or so months, you have seen the quality of journalism in Kenya. There's boldness. You can see. I mean, if you look across, people are now touching stories they wouldn't have touched a few months ago, and you can see readership. When we did the study just 2 months ago, we released a study. Trust in media is going up, and simply because
it's
of the
always
content.
been up. It's always been up.
It's you guys, the editors, Mike, who must make a decision and tell your commercial divisions that they need to give you more editorial independence to deal with depth, public interest stories. Audiences will come back.
And also,
And
what I've discovered as well in the business model is that most media houses are confused between their print or broadcast and digital.
Yes.
Because you find digital is a duplicate of the print.
Digital is just a platform. It's a space. It's a public sphere where we still transfer our journalistic skills.
But of
Someone
course,
would have
the
bought this
target
newspaper,
audience on digital may be different from the traditional
Not really.
newspaper.
No.
It's a mix. Because if I'm able to read 80% of these stories online, why would I buy this newspaper?
Why would I buy?
Why don't you sell me access to that paper, in a way that I would like to?
Or put more content, different content online, so that then I can buy the newspaper and then
There's
still go
something
online.
different that will take me to the. But when you are just reproducing
The same
things,
thing.
then,
Then it doesn't make
and
sense.
those are-
All right,
I mean-
let's look at again the impact that now citizen journalists or content producers, because there are some who are pretty good at what they do.
Yes.
They may not be journalists, but they still have some decent content, which
Yes.
sometimes we even pick
Yes.
and follow up. But the impact that has had on the industry, maybe starting with you, Koki. The impact of
Okay, I like research because it tells you a lot. From some research on online violence against journalism women, I found that there's a lot of exchange between journalists who want to have high ratings and bloggers. So you find that there's that transfer of information. That's why they have so much content that otherwise mainstream media would not be
have.
reporting. That's one thing, and that's a disservice to the industry, I think. The other thing that is apparent, if you look critically at those you're calling bloggers, rarely do they write the story but by themselves. They have their own platforms, and like Victor said earlier, they employ journalists to still give impetus to the story. So they have advantage of rare sources, and they have advantage of stories, journalists working for them. So here you are looking at us like a social influencer and thinking that he's making an impact, but behind him operating are journalists. So at the end of the day, it's how are we treating our profession in terms of accessing opportunities in mainstream media. The other thing that you must look at critically and know that we have a vibrant journalist is now the what do you call it, the independent journalists who have left mainstream media, like Luke, Alan, Chamwada, which is the other brand. They have just become media houses by themselves.
On their
yes, and people are following their content. The third thing is the idea of niche audiences. So what are you doing to meet the needs of niche audiences? If you don't do it as mainstream media, then we will go where? We will go out there to read.
Okay, and maybe also just leveraging on that, look how we can utilize the content that is out there. I'll take an example. At Standard Media right now, we have what we call U-Report. And U-Report is literally gathering information from people out there. Citizens.
You should stop it immediately.
Yeah, because
why do you say that?
You report. You stop it immediately.
Why do you say that?
Let it look.
I've tried that. I've tried that model of your report, where you encourage people to write articles
or
and
to send you articles,
and all that. And there's a huge danger in that, because then you give people a forum to write stories, yet you are not able to clarify most of these stories.
Yes.
You are not able to fact check. So most of the time you'll post a story online, within like a short while someone has complained, you're forced to pull it down and all that. So these people are just...
Would the solution be to stop it or to verify some of those stories?
No, it's
have
to
it as a lead.
identify.
Have it as a lead that's... Because some of them are genuine, some of them are true.
But I would ask myself, why would you want a U report if you have reporters and correspondents around?
And remember where even Standard borrowed that idea, they stopped that thing. It's not an original idea from him. Simply because, like he's saying, you need a lot of manpower to verify those things. Does Standard have the manpower to verify those things?
Capacity.
True, the issue of what that thing is doing to journalism, especially associated with the Standard brand, is huge damage. I can tell you for free. And I've had a discussion with some of your colleagues here that thing is doing serious damage. Go to your legal department, they will tell you how many cases have originated from that thing that is costing this company how much.
Yeah, because most of these guys, you even don't know them.
Yes.
They just find a story.
And the other thing that I found from this research, I like working journalists, is that the media house engages bloggers again. You engage bloggers, I don't know, I think...
All right, so are we saying then that we cannot use or utilize the information that we can get from citizens who may not be qualified as journalists? Because I think I beg to differ, we can do that.
No, you can use it as a lead. Like
as a
last week, there was this fake, I don't know whether it was true, it was verified, about people meeting somewhere and talking about something. Like...
in a basement.
Yeah, in a basement. Yeah. So now, how do you as a journalist pick it up and then say, oh, there were allegations and whatever, and you know very well how to verify? We've talked about fake news for almost 2-3 years, and you still use it as your main source of information.
And you ask the impact of online. You see, what in a converged media newsroom was doing is that you get stories from wherever your beats. Then some of them are put on your online platforms. I mean, like these are the stories you are chasing for the day. Then from the public reaction, from your reader reaction, you see which story is rated high. That's the story now you pick and follow and lead with. So that's the converged newsroom. But you don't just pick those stories. You read, you report many times, and you can read and you get something. Every time call here, those things will be pulled down. Sometimes people have complained. And two, manpower. If Standard itself is getting those problems, how much money and people have you put there to be verifying some of those before you post them on your Standard brand?
Okay, and maybe as we now just get to a conclusion, way forward in terms of using that synergy and that correlation, because with the citizen journalists or content producers, there's a platform to speak, to express. It has opened up for us an opportunity, because before they would just consume what we have. But now with the online platforms, there's an opportunity for people to even express themselves, where they're dissatisfied, where they're not happy, where maybe politicians have taken advantage. How do we utilize that to ensure that now we enrich the content that we have?
First and foremost, media should recognize its position in society. It is trusted. It has loyalty. That remains. Media is king, like they say. All right. And the second thing is to know that audiences have changed. They've mutated. They have different needs. So how do we meet those needs? Okay. The third thing is, okay, get what you want to get. Have a way of what we call media monitoring, media scanning, to be able to see, like Victor says, which of these stories can we tell. Fourthly, and most important, employ journalists, please. In the media house, in the newsroom, employ them and pay them well.
And pay them well.
Yes.
Look how we can utilize and ensure that we glean from that.
Yeah, for me, first I would take the case to Media Council. The issue of now those bloggers, how we can utilize that synergy. If we are able to work like social media is working, Facebook is working, and Twitter, we have verified bloggers, for example. If the Media Council can come up with a model of verifying. So I have something on my website that shows I'm verified and I'm able to play within the rules. That would really help. Saying that even if Standard saw an article on my verified blog, that's safe to pick it and then follow it up. Secondly, there's that now symbiotic relationship where now some articles some stories that might not come to, people might not trust mainstream media. So they'll find a way of breaking them through the bloggers. So that we should nurture that relationship so that the bloggers will be there, they're alternative media, and they give us tips and leads to stories. So I think it's something that
and they have a big role to play. And we have I can tell you, we have worked with bloggers who have a journalistic background, who we have accredited, they attend our trainings, and if you look at their blog, they're so different, professional so there's no problem, But the thing is, many of them have, and for a good reason, they have said they don't want to become journalists, they just want to be bloggers. And for those, we have worked actually twice now with the Beckers, and we have trained a number of their members on code of ethics and responsible use of online, and a number of them notices the value of professional generated content. And quite a number of them are doing well. So the Media Council are reached out actually, but there was also the politics, they wanted to start a social media council of Kenya or something, So and sometimes you don't want to go into those.
Be involved in all that.
But for those who are willing, we have worked with them. A number of them are accredited by the Media Council of Kenya. A number of them are purely trained journalists. They just that they're using that space. So that's, in fact, in almost all our functions, we have been inviting back their leadership to make presentation, to engage, because we want them here, because they benefit, because the newsroom has changed. It's true.
All right.
And we must utilize
the danger now, and I think why these bloggers are going all the way and doing those stories that we feel are not good is monetization. Because this is my full-time job. How do I make money out of it?
And out of it.
So because now I'm unable to monetize this blog, then I have to be on the tech. If I'm given an article, I can write a malicious article and be paid for that. That's where the danger now is coming in.
And then
And that's
again,
why
remember
the Computer Cybercrime Act. Because we should not. There are enough laws in this country today.
Absolutely.
There's the Cybercrime Act. There's the hate speech. The insult laws. Defamation is still there,
Yeah.
and we can still use existing laws to
Yeah,
deal.
to-
That's why largely the online space is regulated by CA, Communication
Yeah.
Authority of Kenya, and the Cybercrime Unit at the Criminal Investigation Department.
And remember, the real essence of being a blogger or a social influencer is to have following and to make sure you still have the fire burning. And in the process, you can do something that is unethical or not morally accepted. But the bottom line is to remember, I emphasize that journalism is key. It's here to stay.
It's here to stay.
But we need to galvanize ourselves from.
All right, I'll want us to conclude because we're out of time, and maybe on your wrapping thoughts, I'll give you each a chance, starting with you, Victor. Advice to the general public as to how to identify, because we have agreed that as journalists, we don't have a problem. You can identify a false article, you can tell that this may be something that is fake, but for the general public out there, sometimes they may not have that professionalism to tell this is true or not true, verified or not verified. But how do they now just identify that this is qualified or not? Let's start with you, Luke, since you're on the online space.
The thing is not to get emotional when you are reading these articles on, online. Is to check out, now look at the website you are looking at, look at the blogger you are dealing with. Once you read that article, there's no way you can verify yourself. The only way right now that we have to verify a story is to go back to the mainstream media and check out that. Because now as a reader, you are not able to call the source of that story, you're not able to call the company to confirm. So the best way is to verify. And if you have doubts, the channels you can raise up that story. You can report it to the Media Council and the regulators where I feel this story is not correct. So that's why we said quality journalism will still save, because people will always come back to the standard.
At the end of the day, they still come back
to the standard.
Victor?
Largely is that let's remain professional, irrespective of what forum we use, whether online or offline. Let's remain. Two, we are important for each other. We can't ignore the emergence of online platforms and technology. It has changed the way journalism is done. We can't run away. Two, I'm looking at a big synergy between trainers and practitioners, so that there's a big linkage. Media houses should give more opportunities to training colleges to bring their students for internship or to learn, because that has been missing. Most of the media houses have refused to pick college students for internship, and that has also led that even people who are trained journalists behave like non-journalists, not because they have not been taught, but they were never given that practical opportunity to learn on hand. So we need to open up. Three, the issue of multimedia. Our colleges need to learn, and they have already started training guys for multimedia production, because that's where the world is going.
That's where we're headed.
That's journalism. But the standard rules of journalism code of ethics remain whether you're online, whether you're offline. Content is the king, but it can only be king if we invest to get quality content by employing people trained.
All right, Koki, you get the last word.
Actually, there's a global movement and a lot of funding for media literacy. So one of the key things that Kenya and the whole world is doing is to make people be able to understand how the media works, to be literate enough to know what is good for them, to enable practitioners to add value to the content that they have, and to maybe regulate what needs to be done for story verification. So I think if you look online, a lot of people are aware today, signs of what is fake, signs of what is not believable, signs of what should be done in a good story. So I think in Kenya we don't have like that,
We're not doing extremely badly.
Yes, we're not doing. Okay. And one of the things that tells us, even if we fall sometimes in terms of rating, in terms of how media performs, I think one of the most vibrant medias in the world, and you can go to any conference, is Kenya in Africa.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. We'll have to wind it up right there. Koki Ochieng, lecturer, media and communication at USIU. Luke Mlunda, who's a media analyst, and Victor Buiro, programs manager, MCK. Thank you for joining us this morning on the Newsroom.